get that uniform? You got proof you're supposed to be wearing it?
Deputy, I'm on official travel. What's the legal reason for this contact?
Don't flip it on me. I asked you a question. Who are you?
Colonel David Holloway. This is a government vehicle. If you have a lawful basis, state it.
You're not going to tell me how to do my job. Show me your ID. Are you detaining me? Yes or no?
This deputy thought he was pressing just another man at a gas pump with a few aggressive questions. But he had no idea he was actually confronting a real high-ranking military commander on official travel. He looked at the uniform, decided it didn't belong on that black man, and acted like suspicion was enough to turn a fuel stop into an interrogation. Watch how that bad decision started falling apart the second the commander stayed calm, stayed precise, and made the deputy explain himself. This wasn't just an awkward encounter. It was a clean, recorded example of reckless authority running straight into discipline. Before this goes any further, say where you're watching from. Country, state, city, wherever. And if you like stories where arrogant people overplay their hand and get exposed by their own behavior, hit like and subscribe. Now look at the scene the way it actually unfolded. Deputy Ryan Mercer pulled into that county line gas station late in the evening, thinking he was about to do something proactive. That's how guys like him usually framed it. Not interfering, not guessing, proactive. He spotted a government SUV at a pump under the canopy lights. Next to it stood Colonel David Holloway, a black man in full military command uniform, fueling up on the way between installations. That should have been the entire story. Government vehicle, military uniform, quiet stop for gas. Move on. Mercer didn't move on. He got out, locked onto Holloway almost immediately, and walked straight toward him with the kind of energy that told everyone nearby this wasn't a greeting. He didn't start normal. He didn't introduce himself in any professional way that matched the situation. He went right at the uniform. He wanted to know why Holloway was wearing it, where he got it, whether he was actually military, whether he had proof he had the right to wear it. That right there told the whole story honestly. Mercer wasn't reacting to a crime. He was reacting to what he thought looked out of place, and Holloway caught that instantly. Holloway didn't flinch, didn't match Mercer's tone, didn't start explaining himself like he owed a stranger a life summary at pump number 4. He answered respectfully. Short, controlled. He made it clear he was on official travel, and then asked the question Mercer clearly didn't want asked back. What legal basis did he have for detaining or questioning him while he was fueling a government vehicle? That was the first moment Mercer had a chance to reset. He could have backed up, realized he'd gone in too hot, and corrected himself. A professional officer would have done exactly that. He didn't. He took Holloway's composure personally. Bad officers do that all the time. They hear a calm legal question and treat it like disrespect because they were expecting nervousness, apology, or submission. Mercer had already decided he was in control of the whole interaction. When Holloway didn't play small for him, Mercer got sharper. He kept pressing the same point. Uniform, identity, proof. He acted like the mere possibility that someone could impersonate military personnel gave him the right to turn his own assumption into a field investigation with no clear basis. That's where ego started driving the stop. Not law, not facts. Ego. Holloway stayed where he was, posture straight, voice even, movements minimal. The more Mercer poked at him, the more obvious the contrast became. One man looked trained. The other looked irritated the training wasn't working on him. A truck driver fueling 2 pumps over started watching. So did a woman by a compact sedan near the store side. Inside, the cashier kept glancing up through the glass because Mercer's body language was getting louder even before his voice did. People know what routine police contact looks like. This didn't look routine. This looked personal. And it had started fast. About 10 minutes earlier, Holloway had taken the exit because he still had miles to cover and the fuel gauge had dropped lower than he liked. He was traveling in a marked government vehicle on a standard movement between installations. Nothing unusual there. No speeding, no traffic stop, no suspicious call attached to the plate. He'd pulled in, parked cleanly by the diesel-capable pump, stepped out in uniform, and started fueling. That should matter. It mattered later, at least. Mercer had entered the lot from the far side and seen the scene in pieces before he saw it as a whole. Government vehicle, black man in command uniform, quiet gas station. For most people, that adds up to nothing. For Mercer, it triggered some ugly mix of suspicion and entitlement. He didn't think through what he was seeing. He reacted to it. He treated Holloway's presence in that uniform like it needed to be justified to him first. That was the original sin of the whole encounter. Not caution, not investigation, assumption. Mercer shifted position and started moving around the SUV, looking it over like he was waiting for something to validate what he already believed. Holloway noticed it. Witnesses noticed it. Mercer wasn't gathering facts in any orderly way. He was fishing. He wanted the vehicle to look wrong. He wanted the answers to sound wrong. He wanted the scene to become the story he'd already written in his head. Holloway didn't help him write it. He kept bringing Mercer back to the same issue. Was he being detained? If so, for what reason? If not, why was Mercer demanding identification in that tone over a lawful uniform in a government vehicle? Clean questions, tight questions. The kind that sound even stronger when the other person can't answer them directly. Mercer didn't have good answers, so he started replacing answers with force of presence. He stepped closer. He repeated demands. He leaned harder on the idea that the uniform itself might be fake. He made it sound like Holloway had created the problem by not immediately handing over whatever Mercer wanted. And that's another thing officers like Mercer do. They create the conflict, then blame the target for not making it easier. By then, the woman at the next pump had her phone angled low. Not dramatically, just enough. The truck driver had stopped pretending not to listen. The cashier had already guessed this was heading somewhere bad, because Mercer's posture had gone from questioning to challenging. Holloway still hadn't raised his voice. That made Mercer look worse every second. Then Mercer made the move that really buried him later. He got on the radio and called for backup. Not because Holloway had threatened him. Not because Holloway reached for anything. Not because there was any visible crime. He called because Holloway's calm wasn't giving him the result he wanted, and he needed other deputies to arrive and validate the pressure he'd started. Worse than that, he framed the situation in a way that suggested he might be dealing with someone impersonating military personnel. That wording mattered. A lot. Dispatch recorded every word. Bodycam kept rolling. Witness phones kept catching pieces of the tone and timing. Mercer was building a record against himself and didn't know it yet. And Holloway knew exactly what kind of officer he was dealing with now. Not the cautious kind. Not the competent kind. The insecure kind. The kind who confused being challenged with being undermined. The kind who thought authority meant nobody should ever ask him to justify what he was doing. That's where this stopped being a bad interaction and started becoming a career-ending one. Because once backup started moving, verification would start moving too. And Mercer had just escalated a no-issue fuel stop into an official suspicion call against the wrong man. Really the worst possible man. Mercer kept the pressure on after the backup call. He stayed focused on the uniform and acted like that alone justified everything he was doing. He wanted identification. He wanted proof. He wanted Holloway to explain himself in a way that made Mercer feel in control again. That was the real problem now. The stop had stopped being about facts. Mercer was trying to force the scene to match the suspicion he started with. Holloway didn't help him do that. He answered in a controlled way and brought the issue back to the same point. He was standing beside a government vehicle, fueling it during official travel, and Mercer had walked up treating him like a criminal without explaining any legal reason. That was the issue, not Mercer's gut feeling, not Mercer's personal disbelief, the actual reason for the stop. Mercer had no good answer, so he shifted into inspection mode. He moved around the SUV and looked at the plates, the markings, the windows, the rear quarter panels like he was trying to spot something that would save him. He checked the vehicle because the uniform challenge wasn't landing the way he expected. Then he went back to the uniform again. Same angle, same suspicion. He was bouncing between the man and the vehicle because he still wanted one of them to give him a clean excuse. Nothing did. The SUV was clearly government issued. The uniform was in order. Holloway's appearance, posture, and responses all matched someone who knew exactly what he was doing and exactly how not to get dragged into a pointless roadside argument. That contrast started catching attention. The truck driver parked 2 pumps over, stayed where he was, and watched. A woman near the storefront side of the lot slowed down instead of leaving. Inside the station, the cashier kept looking up because Mercer wasn't handling this like a brief check. He was dragging it out. People could see that. They didn't need legal training to see it. One man was standing there, fueling a vehicle and answering in a controlled way. The deputy was the one turning it into a scene. Mercer asked for identification again, harder this time. Holloway didn't give him a performance. He didn't start trying to impress him. He pressed Mercer on the actual reason for the detention and whether Mercer was giving a lawful order or just making demands because he didn't like what he was seeing. That put Mercer in a bad spot. He wanted compliance without having to explain himself first. And that's where his tone started slipping. He got sharper, less professional, more personal. He treated Holloway's calm response like a challenge to his authority. That part mattered later because Bodycam doesn't just capture words. It captures pace, tone, distance, and how fast an officer gets irritated when somebody refuses to play the role he assigned them. Dispatch started checking the vehicle. That should have helped Mercer back out. It didn't. The registration came back consistent with a government-owned vehicle. That was a big fact, not a minor detail. A real deputy looking at the situation honestly would have understood right there that he was standing on weak ground. Mercer didn't step back. He adjusted the story in his own head and kept going. Now he acted like maybe the vehicle was real, but the man standing beside it wasn't. That was the point where his judgment fully broke down. He started picking at the rank and presentation of the uniform, as if he had some solid basis for doubting it. He didn't. He was just talking, filling space, trying to keep control of an encounter that was already turning against him. Holloway let him keep talking because Mercer was making the later review easier with every extra minute. Then Mercer used the radio again. He updated the situation in a way that still leaned into the impersonation idea, even though the facts were already moving the other way. That was a serious mistake. He wasn't just being rude in public anymore. He was pushing a misleading version of events into an official record. Witnesses noticed the same thing supervisors would later notice. Mercer had started with suspicion and never honestly tested it. He just kept feeding it. The woman at the next pump had her phone up now. The truck driver was listening openly. The cashier would later remember Mercer circling back to the same accusation instead of explaining why he had started the stop at all. That mattered because Mercer was going to need ambiguity later, and there wasn't much left. Then dispatch came back with more. This time it wasn't just the vehicle. The identity and travel status connected through official channels. Holloway was exactly who he appeared to be. Legitimate military commander, official travel, no active issue, no basis for an impersonation theory. That was the turning point. Mercer had spent several minutes treating a lawful uniform like evidence of a crime, and now the record was closing around him. The vehicle checked out. The travel checked out. The man checked out. All that was left was Mercer's behavior. He didn't handle that well. He hesitated, tried to stay in control of the scene without admitting he had pushed it too far. That only made it worse. By then, the second unit was close, witnesses were already recording, and dispatch had enough information to show that Mercer's original framing was wrong. He couldn't clean it up anymore. Too much had already been captured. When backup arrived, they weren't walking into a dangerous impersonation stop. They were walking into the aftermath of Mercer making a bad call and refusing to let go of it. That changed the atmosphere right away. The focus shifted off Holloway and onto what Mercer had actually done. And that was the real problem now. Not the uniform, not the vehicle. Mercer. He had challenged a lawful military commander without clear legal grounds, escalated the stop after getting no evidence of wrongdoing, and pushed a false suspicion hard enough to call in other deputies. Once that became clear, the encounter stopped being about Mercer's authority and started becoming about Mercer's credibility. That was not a fight he was going to win. The second unit pulled in and saw the problem almost immediately. Not because Mercer explained it well. He hadn't. The problem was the scene itself. A marked government SUV sat at the pump. Colonel David Holloway stood beside it in full command uniform. He wasn't acting evasive. He wasn't moving around. He wasn't doing anything that matched the kind of radio framing Mercer had pushed out. Mercer looked like the only person there trying to turn it into something bigger. That matters. Officers read scenes fast. Good ones do anyway. The arriving deputies looked at Holloway, looked at the vehicle, and then looked at Mercer. By then, dispatch had already confirmed enough to kill the impersonation angle, so the backup officers weren't stepping into uncertainty. They were stepping into Mercer's bad call, while it was still sitting in plain view under the gas station lights. Mercer still tried to hold the scene. He stayed close, kept talking, and acted like he was still running a valid stop. But it was falling apart on him in real time. The core issue was settled. Holloway was legitimate. The travel was legitimate. The vehicle was legitimate. Mercer had started with suspicion, escalated with attitude, and ended up with nothing behind it. Holloway didn't need to do much at that point. He stayed composed and answered what needed answering. He didn't get dramatic, didn't try to embarrass Mercer in front of the other deputies. He kept the focus where it belonged. Mercer had initiated the confrontation over the uniform itself and kept pushing even after facts started cutting against him. That was the whole issue, and by then everybody standing there could see it. The other deputies weren't blind. They could hear the gap between Mercer's earlier radio tone and the reality in front of them. They could also see Holloway's bearing, not just the uniform, the way he spoke, the way he held himself, the way he kept asking for the legal basis instead of getting pulled into Mercer's nonsense. None of that looked like a man pretending to be something he wasn't. Mercer's problem now was simple. He had created a stop that only made sense if his assumption turned out to be right. It didn't. So every extra second he stayed aggressive just made the review worse later. One of the other deputies asked the practical questions: travel status, assignment movement, vehicle confirmation. The answers lined up. Dispatch confirmation lined up. The markings on the SUV lined up. The scene was done. Mercer should have stepped back right there and shut up. He didn't do that cleanly. He tried to linger in that half-defensive, half-authoritative mode officers slip into when they know they've messed up, but still want to look firm in front of coworkers. He acted like he had only been checking things out, just being cautious, just doing his job. That excuse already looked weak, and it got weaker the more people considered how he had actually started. He hadn't approached with neutral caution. He'd gone straight at Holloway over the uniform. He'd demanded proof before explaining any legal reason for the stop. He'd circled the vehicle, trying to manufacture support for his own assumption. Then he'd called backup and leaned into an impersonation theory that official checks did not support. That wasn't caution. That was bad judgment. The witnesses could tell the atmosphere had shifted. The truck driver was still there. The woman recording hadn't left. The cashier inside kept watching because the energy had changed from confrontation to exposure. Mercer wasn't in control anymore. He was standing inside the consequences of his own behavior, and everybody could feel it. Holloway made one thing clear before the scene ended. He stated in a calm and direct way that wearing lawful authority and carrying oneself with discipline should never be treated as suspicious just because an officer decides it doesn't look right on the person wearing it. That was the line that stuck. Not because it was theatrical, because it was accurate. It cut right through everything Mercer had been trying to hide behind. And Mercer knew it. He didn't have a comeback for that. There wasn't one. He had challenged the wrong man for the wrong reason, in the wrong way. And too many people had watched him do it. Once Holloway's status was settled, the rest of the contact had to unwind. Mercer could no longer justify detaining him. He could no longer sell the stop as a developing investigation. He couldn't even rely on confusion, because dispatch records, Bodycam, and witness video had already frozen the sequence in place. That's what ended the scene. Not a threat, not a speech. Documentation. Holloway finished what he had come there to do. Fuel the vehicle. Continue the trip. Mercer was left standing at the gas station with backup officers who now understood they had been called into a stop built on a deputy's ego and assumptions. That alone would have been bad enough, but the real damage started after everyone left. Mercer still had reports to write. Dispatch logs existed. Bodycam existed. Witnesses had video. And now, supervisors would have to look at a stop where a deputy had openly challenged a lawful military commander with no clear legal basis, escalated the encounter after getting no evidence of wrongdoing, and misrepresented the situation over the radio badly enough to bring in another unit. A lot of officers survive messy encounters because the details stay fuzzy. Mercer didn't get that luxury. Too much of this one was captured. By the next day, the footage was already being reviewed from multiple angles. Bodycam showed how Mercer opened the contact. Dispatch audio showed how he framed it. Witness clips showed the tone and pacing from outside law enforcement's own camera angle. And once those pieces got laid side by side, his credibility started collapsing fast. Because now it was impossible to pretend this had been a routine check that just got clarified. It hadn't. He had targeted Holloway first, then tried to justify the targeting after the fact. That distinction was going to cost him. By the next morning, Mercer's problem had moved out of the gas station and into review. That's where bad stops usually get stripped down. No attitude, no adrenaline, no chance to improvise. Just sequence, footage, audio, and policy. And Mercer's sequence was ugly. Sergeant Alicia Bennett started with the body cam. She watched Mercer pull in, step out, and go straight at Colonel David Holloway over the uniform. That point mattered because it killed the idea that this started as some broad safety check or neutral contact. He had focused on the man first and treated the uniform itself like a reason for suspicion. Then she watched him demand identification before giving any clear legal basis for the stop. Then she watched him keep pressing after getting nothing that supported the direction he had chosen. That alone was bad. Then she pulled the dispatch audio. That made it worse. Mercer hadn't just made a poor decision in person. He had sent that poor decision into the system. His backup call leaned into possible military impersonation even while basic facts were already cutting against that theory. That meant other deputies rolled in with a false impression because Mercer had framed it that way. Supervisors take that seriously. Once an officer starts misrepresenting facts over radio, the problem stops being simple bad judgment and starts becoming a credibility issue. Then the witness videos came in. Then, those clips didn't replace body cam. They sharpened it. They showed the pacing from the outside. They showed Mercer circling the government SUV, repeating the same suspicion, and staying locked on Holloway long after a reasonable deputy should have backed off. They also showed something Mercer really didn't need anyone seeing: the contrast. Holloway looked controlled from start to finish. Mercer looked like a man who had made a snap decision and then couldn't let go of it. That pattern carried into Mercer's written report. He tried to smooth the language out. He made the stop sound more neutral than it had been. He used the kind of wording officers use when they know the footage might not help them: concern, verification, suspicious circumstances. The problem for him was simple. Bennett had already watched what happened. She knew where he started, what he emphasized, and how he escalated. His report didn't match his conduct cleanly enough. That's where his credibility really started collapsing. And once a deputy loses credibility with supervisors, things move fast. Bennett compared the report to the Bodycam timeline. She compared it to dispatch. She compared it to the witness footage. The gaps were obvious. Mercer had no documented complaint to work from, no reported crime, no visible evidence of impersonation, no conduct by Holloway that justified treating him like a fraud at the pump. He had acted on suspicion first, then gone looking for support after the fact. That is poison in an internal review. Then command staff got looped in because this wasn't just a sloppy street contact anymore. Mercer had aggressively confronted a legitimate high-ranking military commander in full uniform during official travel, using county authority with no solid legal basis. That carries weight. Agencies hate cases like that because the facts are clean and the optics are worse. The military side confirmed Holloway's status and movement without drama. They didn't need speeches. They didn't need outrage. They just confirmed the obvious and let the county deal with its own deputy. That made the whole thing even more damaging for Mercer. There was no gray area left, no uncertainty, no real factual dispute, just conduct. The review found several problems at once. Mercer initiated the encounter without clear legal justification. He fixated on the uniform itself instead of any actual unlawful behavior. He escalated after failing to find evidence that supported his suspicion. He framed the stop inaccurately when calling for backup. Then he wrote it up in a way that softened what the footage clearly showed. That combination ended him. A deputy can survive one weak call sometimes, even one rude encounter, depending on the agency. But bad initiation, bad escalation, misleading radio framing, and a report that doesn't line up with recorded evidence, that stack usually breaks a career. It broke Mercer's. He was placed under internal investigation first. Then he was pulled from duty. Then the final decision came down. Termination. Badge gone. Career over. Not because somebody yelled louder than him. Not because Holloway threatened a lawsuit on the spot. Because Mercer's own record trapped him. Video, audio, sequence, policy. That's the part people miss when they talk about accountability. They expect one big dramatic moment. Most of the time, it's not that. It's slower and colder. A supervisor watching footage 3 times. A timeline getting written. A report getting compared against audio. An officer realizing too late that every version he offers sounds weaker than the one already on camera. Holloway didn't spend the next week doing interviews or trying to turn himself into the center of a public fight. He continued his duties. He documented what happened. He cooperated where needed. And he let the process do what it was supposed to do. That restraint mattered. It also exposed the biggest difference between the two men. Holloway carried real authority and didn't need to perform it. Mercer had county power, misused it, and then lost it. The second review replaced ego with facts. The gas station incident kept circulating inside the county for a while. Officers talked about it. Staff talked about it. Not because it was complicated, because it was clear. A deputy saw a black man in a command uniform, decided it didn't look right to him, and acted on that feeling like it was enough. Then the cameras showed exactly what that decision looked like in the real world. And that became the lesson. Not every abuse of authority ends with handcuffs or a courtroom. Sometimes it ends with a file, a review, and a deputy cleaning out his locker because he couldn't control his assumptions for 5 minutes at a gas pump. That's what got Ryan Mercer. Not bad luck. Not politics, his own choices. And Colonel David Holloway never had to do anything dramatic to expose that. He just stayed disciplined, asked the right questions, and let Mercer keep talking until the record was complete. That's the whole story. One man relied on ego. The other relied on discipline. Only one of those holds up when the footage starts rolling back. Tell me what you think. Was Mercer just reckless, or did he show exactly who he was the second he walked up to that pump? And if you've ever seen authority abused like this, put it in the comments. Share the story with somebody who gets what real accountability looks like, and subscribe for more stories like this.
Put the phone away, right now.
I'm calling my dad.
No, you don't get on the phone while I'm talking to you.
I'm not doing anything wrong.
Get off the phone, now, or this turns into a problem.
This is already a problem. You still haven't told me what crime you think happened. Now, you will deal with U.S. Marshal.
Officer Evan Rourke thought this was going to be one of those easy park stops. A teenager, a backpack, a couple questions, a quick flex of authority. He didn't think it would turn into a multi-angle recording situation with a federal law enforcement supervisor showing up as the kid's father. He didn't think his own body cam and dispatch logs would become the thing that ended his career. Tell me where you're watching from, state or country. And if you like stories where somebody stays calm, asks the right legal questions, and the system gets forced to answer with facts, hit like and subscribe. Here's how it actually started. 16-year-old Jalen Brooks was walking through a public city park in the middle of the day. The place was calm. Families near the playground, a few people on benches, some walkers using the loop path. Nothing chaotic, nothing urgent. Jalen had a backpack on. That was it. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding the bag. He wasn't messing with anyone. He was walking like he belonged there. Because he did. It was a public park. Officer Evan Rourke was patrolling nearby in his cruiser. He saw Jalen and turned in. No radio call came in. No dispatch note about a suspect. No park employee flagged him down. Rourke didn't arrive because of a complaint. He arrived because he decided Jalen didn't fit in his head. Rourke parked and walked straight toward Jalen. He didn't stay back and talk normal. He closed distance and set a controlling tone. The kind of approach that tells a person, without saying it, that they're already being treated like a problem. Rourke started with questioning who Jalen was, what he was doing, why he was there. Jalen didn't get loud. He didn't get sarcastic. He kept his hands where they could be seen and answered in the most controlled way possible. Then he asked the only two questions that mattered. He asked what crime was being investigated. He asked if he was being detained. That's where the stop could have ended. If Rourke had a real reason, he could have stated it. If he didn't, he could have made it a voluntary contact and left. Rourke didn't state a crime. He didn't say Jalen matched a description. He didn't say there was an active investigation in the park. He pivoted into something else. He demanded ID, not once, repeatedly, like repetition would turn it into a legal requirement. Jalen didn't hand it over because Rourke still hadn't explained what crime he was investigating or why Jalen was being stopped. Jalen stayed calm and kept returning to the same point. If this is a detention, say the reason. If it isn't, he should be free to go. That frustrated Rourke, and you could see his strategy shift. He started trying to build suspicion out loud. He treated Jalen's calm as disrespect. He treated the questions as defiance. He started acting like the problem wasn't the lack of a reason, but the fact that Jalen wasn't acting scared. Then Rourke broadened the questioning. He asked where Jalen was coming from, where he was going, why he chose that park, what was in the backpack, who he was meeting. He wasn't tying any of it to a reported crime. He was fishing. He wanted something he could write down later. While this was happening, people nearby started paying attention. One person on a bench lifted a phone and started recording. Another person on the walkway did the same. Someone near the parking lot stopped and held their phone up from farther away. Now there were witnesses and cameras, more than one angle, more than one person. That matters because it changes what an officer can claim later. Rourke noticed the phones. He didn't calm down. He got more controlling. That's when he pushed for a search. He asked for permission to search Jalen's backpack. He didn't say he had probable cause. He didn't say he had a warrant. He didn't point to anything specific Jalen did that suggested a weapon or contraband. He tried to make it sound like an easy way to clear this up. Jalen said no, calmly, no theatrics, no insults, just no consent. Rourke immediately tried to flip that refusal into suspicion. He implied that if Jalen had nothing to hide, he would agree. He leaned on that pressure line because it works on a lot of people, especially kids. Jalen didn't bite. He stayed on the same track. What crime is being investigated, and am I being detained? Then Jalen called his father. He pulled his phone out slowly and clearly, in full view. He didn't make any sudden movements. He didn't step toward the bag. He didn't do anything an officer could honestly describe as a threat. He made a normal phone call in a public place. Jalen told his father where he was and that an officer was stopping him and demanding ID and a bag search without stating a reason. Short, clear information. Rourke reacted badly to the call. Not because the call was dangerous, but because the call took control away from him. He stepped closer and told Jalen to get off the phone. He tried to interrupt by talking over Jalen and issuing more commands. He demanded to know who Jalen was calling, even though Jalen was already saying it was his father. He treated the call like it was an act of defiance, instead of a teen asking a parent for help. This is the part people miss when they watch clips like this. The phone call isn't a threat. The phone call is accountability. It means the officer can't control the story alone. The recording phone stayed up. Rourke then called for a second unit. Backup arrived and parked close. Another officer stepped in. Rourke's confidence went up immediately. He started repeating the same demands again. ID and the backpack. But now with another uniform standing there. Like that alone made the stop legitimate. Jalen stayed composed. He didn't start pleading. He didn't start yelling. He stood there with visible hands, kept his voice controlled, and kept asking the same two questions because those questions forced the officer to either explain the legal basis or admit he didn't have one. And at that point, Jalen's father was already on the way. Not as a vague threat, not as a dramatic moment. As a real person driving to a real location because his 16-year-old kid was being boxed in by two officers in a public park while strangers recorded. Jalen's father didn't show up like a guy looking for a fight. He showed up like a professional walking into a situation he already understood. Calm face, controlled pace, eyes scanning everything at once. Two officers, one teenager, 3 or 4 phones held up at different distances. A backpack sitting where it had been the whole time. Deputy U.S. Marshal David Brooks didn't start with insults. He didn't start with a speech. He didn't even start with the as a father angle. He started with procedure. He positioned himself near Jalen without crowding him. Close enough to be support, not close enough to look like he was escalating. Then he looked at Officer Rourke and went straight to the one thing Rourke still hadn't produced: a lawful reason. Brooks asked Rourke what call he was on. Rourke gave a vague answer, the kind that sounds official but doesn't contain any actual information. He tried to frame it as checking things out and making sure and suspicious behavior. Brooks didn't take the bait. He didn't debate whether Jalen looked suspicious. He asked for the dispatch call number or the complaint that led to the stop. Rourke didn't have one. So Brooks narrowed it down again. He asked if a park employee complained, if a citizen flagged him down, if dispatch aired a suspect description, if Rourke observed an actual crime. Rourke tried to keep it broad. He leaned on general talk about thefts in parks, public safety, and people have been reporting things. Nothing concrete, no date, no description, no direction of travel, no clothing description, no victim, no timeline. Brooks watched him do it and didn't let him drift. He asked what specific crime was being investigated right now, in that moment. Rourke still didn't answer cleanly. He pivoted to the backpack. He suggested the bag was the reason. Like a backpack in a park was evidence of something by itself. Brooks immediately cut that off with the obvious point. People carry backpacks in parks every day. If the bag is the reason, then everybody is a suspect. That's not a standard, that's an excuse. Rourke then tried the next move officers use when they don't have a basis. He reframed the situation as the kid's behavior. He focused on Jalen not handing over ID, on Jalen asking questions, on Jalen not consenting to a search. He treated that like it was resisting the investigation. Brooks didn't argue. He asked a simple question that forced Rourke into a corner. Was Jalen legally required to provide ID at that point? And what specific facts created reasonable suspicion for a detention? Rourke didn't like that question because it's the kind of question that gets replayed later on Bodycam, in front of supervisors, in court. Rourke tried to save it by switching explanations. First, it was park issues. Then it was odd behavior. Then it was refusing to cooperate. Each time Brooks pinned him back down to the same point. What started this, and what facts justified keeping a teenager stopped? While this back and forth was happening, the second officer stood nearby and watched. He didn't jump in with a clear explanation either. He mostly backed Rourke's posture by being there. That's what made it feel heavier for Jalen. Two uniforms creates pressure even when nobody's shouting. The phone stayed up the whole time. And you could tell Rourke knew it because he kept adjusting how he spoke. He started using those careful-sounding phrases that don't actually say anything. He started talking like he was building a report out loud. Brooks didn't let him write the report with his mouth. Brooks asked if Rourke had told Jalen he was detained. Rourke tried to keep it blurry. Not quite yes, not quite no. He wanted the power of a detention without the responsibility of explaining it. Brooks pushed again, because blur is how people get trapped. Was Jalen free to leave? Yes or no? Rourke stalled, and that's when the situation shifted from annoying stop to department problem. Because now the scene had multiple witnesses recording, a teenager who'd been calm the entire time, a father who clearly understood federal standards and documentation, and an officer who still couldn't identify a single specific basis for this encounter. Brooks then did something that made Rourke's face tighten. He identified himself, not as a threat, as context. He didn't flash it around dramatically. He didn't posture. He simply made it clear he wasn't guessing about procedure and he wasn't going to let the stop stay vague. Rourke reacted exactly how officers react when they realize the person in front of them can follow the chain of accountability all the way up. He got defensive. He tried to reassert control with tone instead of facts. Brooks stayed even. He told Rourke to call a supervisor. Rourke hesitated, then acted like that was unnecessary. He tried to keep it in the, "we'll just handle it here" lane. Brooks didn't move off it. Supervisor, now. Because if Rourke truly had a legal basis, a supervisor would confirm it. If he didn't, the stop needed to end before it got worse. Rourke made the call. And while they waited, Rourke tried one more time to pressure Jalen into the easy exit for the officer. Just show ID. Just let us look in the bag. Just make this simple. Brooks didn't allow that pressure to land. He kept Jalen focused on what mattered. Stay calm, hands visible, don't consent to searches, don't provide extra information beyond what's required, and keep everything observable for the cameras. A lot of viewers think the power moment is when someone yells the loudest. It isn't. The power moment is when somebody refuses to let an officer keep the reason fuzzy. And the supervisor was on the way to a scene that was already recorded from the bench, the walkway, and the parking lot. Lieutenant Naomi Vega arrived in her patrol SUV and parked close enough to see the group without walking into the middle of it blind. She stepped out, looked at the spacing, and took a quick read of the scene before anyone spoke to her. Two officers were standing near Jalen. Jalen was still on the path with his backpack. His father was next to him. Several civilians were holding phones up from different spots. Nobody was rushing. Nobody was yelling. It had the look of a stop, that had gone long and attracted attention. Lieutenant Vega walked up and spoke to Officer Evan Rourke first. She didn't open with a general question like, "What's happening?" She asked him to explain why Jalen was being detained. Rourke started talking in broad terms. He referenced recent issues and proactive patrol and suspicious behavior. He didn't give a specific call. He didn't give a specific crime. He talked like the park itself was the reason. Lieutenant Vega cut that down to specifics. She asked for the dispatch information. She asked if there was a complaint from a park worker or a caller. She asked for a suspect description, if one had been broadcast. She asked what exact crime was being investigated at that moment. Rourke couldn't provide a dispatch call number. He didn't name a complainant. He didn't produce a description that matched Jalen. He kept trying to justify the stop with general statements about thefts and safety. Lieutenant Vega then asked what Rourke personally observed that connected Jalen to any specific crime. She asked for actions, not impressions. Rourke tried to make the backpack the thing. He implied the bag created concern and that Jalen's refusal to cooperate made it worse. Lieutenant Vega didn't accept that as a basis. She pointed the conversation back to the standard she needed, a specific crime being investigated and specific facts tying Jalen to it. She also addressed the refusal point directly. Refusing consent to a search and asking if you're detained or not crimes, and they don't create reasonable suspicion by themselves. Then she asked the question that forces clarity. Was this a voluntary contact or an actual detention? Rourke hesitated and tried to keep it in the middle. He wanted the authority of a detention without having to justify a detention. He kept talking instead of answering cleanly. Lieutenant Vega pressed for a direct answer and a direct explanation. She gave Rourke another chance to state the legal basis in plain terms. He still couldn't produce one. At that point, Lieutenant Vega took control of the scene in a practical way. She told Officer Rourke to disengage and step back. She directed the second officer to stop crowding Jalen and create space. You could see the posture change immediately because the supervisor's instructions were specific, not optional. Lieutenant Vega then addressed Jalen directly. She told him he was not being detained and that he was free to leave. She made sure it was said clearly in front of the witnesses and cameras, so there was no confusion about whether the stop had ended. Jalen didn't argue. He didn't gloat. He didn't say anything that could be turned into a new issue. He stayed composed, kept his hands visible, and moved with his father away from the officers. Deputy United States Marshal David Brooks didn't try to extend the confrontation either. He stayed focused on documentation. He asked Lieutenant Vega for the procedure to request body camera footage and dispatch records. He asked where to file a formal complaint and who would receive it. He also confirmed the officers' names and badge numbers while everyone was still present. Lieutenant Vega provided the basic information without turning it into a debate in the park. She kept the interaction short and controlled. Then she directed her officers to clear the area. Officer Rourke didn't have a final line. He didn't get to win the moment. He just had to stand there while a supervisor ended the stop and multiple phones kept recording. Jalen and his father left the park. The public part of it was over. Deputy United States Marshal David Brooks didn't treat the park stop like a bad moment that ended when his son got released. He treated it like an evidence event because he'd seen how fast a vague stop turns into a clean report that doesn't match what actually happened. As soon as they got away from the officers, he wrote down the timeline while it was fresh. The time Jalen called him, the time he arrived, the time the second unit showed up, the time Lieutenant Naomi Vega ended the stop. He also noted where each witness was standing, because angles matter when videos start circulating. Within the next day, Brooks started requesting records. He asked for Officer Evan Rourke's body camera footage, the second officer's body camera footage, and the dash camera footage from both patrol cars. He requested the dispatch audio for the entire time window and the CAD entries tied to that park area during that period. He also requested any written bulletin or notice Rourke had referenced about park thefts, along with any call for service or park complaint log that would support the idea that Rourke had been responding to something specific. At the same time, Brooks filed a formal complaint with the department. He didn't write it like an emotional story. He wrote it like an incident report with timestamps. He stated that his 16-year-old son was stopped while walking through a public park, that the officer repeatedly demanded identification without stating a specific crime being investigated, that the officer repeatedly pressed for consent to search a backpack without a warrant or stated probable cause, and that the officer attempted to stop or disrupt Jalen's phone call to a parent. He included the detail that multiple witnesses recorded from different locations and that a supervisor arrived and ended the stop after the officer could not provide a specific basis for detention. When the footage and logs came back, they didn't support Rourke's narrative. The body camera showed Rourke initiating the encounter without referencing a dispatch call or complaint. It showed him escalating when Jalen stayed calm and asked whether he was being detained. It showed repeated ID demands and repeated pressure for a backpack search without a clear stated crime. The second unit arrival added presence, but it didn't add a reason. Dispatch audio and CAD entries made the problem clearer. There was no matching call number that sent Rourke to that park for a specific suspect. There was no complaint logged in that time window describing a teen like Jalen. If there was a park theft bulletin Rourke leaned on verbally, it didn't show up as a real-time directive tied to stopping Jalen, and it wasn't documented in a way that justified detaining a specific person. Rourke's written report then became the focus because it was the only place his justification existed in full. The problem was that his report language didn't line up with what the videos and logs showed. He described the stop like it began with a legitimate investigation and then required escalation. The footage showed the opposite order. He began with a subjective decision, then tried to create justification through questions Idaho demands and pressure for consent. He leaned on vague descriptions and framed Jalen's refusal to consent and refusal to volunteer ID as suspicious behavior, even though those choices were legal and were the same choices many people make when an officer can't explain a detention. With contradictions that obvious, the city had to treat it as a civil rights exposure, not a routine complaint. Brooks retained counsel and the case moved into a civil rights lawsuit based on an unlawful detention and coercive search pressure. The city reviewed the body camera, dash camera, and dispatch records and chose to settle rather than defend the stop in front of a jury with the footage playing. The settlement forced the city to do more than write a check. The department updated training and procedures around park stops and similar discretionary contacts. Officers were required to articulate a specific crime being investigated when detaining someone, document the initiating reason clearly, and follow stricter rules on how consent searches are requested and recorded. Supervisors were also expected to respond faster when a stop extended without a clear basis. Officer Rourke lost his job because the gaps weren't small mistakes. They went to the foundation of lawful policing. Initiating a stop without articulable facts, escalating to pressure compliance, and writing a report that didn't match the record. For Jalen, the result wasn't about winning an argument. It was about getting through a coercive stop without giving the officer an excuse, then watching the system get forced to account for what it did. For Brooks, it was a reminder that accountability isn't a debate in the moment. It's records, logs, footage, and a timeline that doesn't lie. If you've ever been stopped for no clear reason, what would you have done in Jalen's position? And would you have started recording if you were in that park? Share your thoughts. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe.
Where are you coming from tonight? Where are you headed?
Heading home.
You been drinking at all? Anything illegal in the car I need to know about?
No, sir.
All right, then we'll keep it simple. Let me take a quick look in the car and you'll be on your way.
No, I don't consent to a search.
So you telling me you have a problem with me checking?
I'm telling you no.
People who got nothing to hide don't.
The deputy believed he was running the same late-night script he'd run 100 times. A small equipment stop, a few extra questions, a consent search if the driver looked nervous, a little pressure if the driver didn't. He picked the wrong man because the driver didn't panic, didn't argue, and didn't try to talk his way out of anything. He did something that throws off officers who rely on intimidation instead of procedure. He stayed calm, answered what was required, and kept his boundaries clear when the deputy tried to turn a tag light stop into a fishing trip. That deputy didn't realize he was doing all of it on camera, with dispatch audio running, and with a driver who understood exactly how misconduct gets proven, through timestamps, policy limits, and the officer's own written words. And when the driver finally identified himself as a federal judge, he didn't use it like a threat. He didn't throw status around. He didn't demand special treatment. He stated a fact after the stop had already been stretched past its purpose. The deputy still kept pushing. Right after this hook, tell me where you're watching from. City and state. And if you watch these stories because you're tired of power trips getting excused, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the ones where the record does the talking. Now let's go back to how it actually started, because the most believable part of stories like this is that the first 2 minutes looked normal. It was after midnight on a county highway with long, dark stretches and occasional side roads. Deputy Cole Harkins was patrolling alone. The traffic was light, the night was slow, and his attention was on small violations that could justify a stop. He spotted a sedan ahead with a dim taglight. That was enough. He pulled in behind it and activated his lights. The driver, Malcolm Reed, responded the way officers claim they want drivers to respond. He signaled, slowed, and pulled over smoothly. He chose a safe shoulder. He stopped with plenty of space. He kept his hands visible. Harkins walked up to the driver's side window and started the stop as an equipment violation. Reed gave his license, registration, and insurance quickly. No stalling, no sudden movements, no sarcasm. He acted like a person who just wanted to fix the issue and go home. That's where the stop should have stayed simple. Instead, Harkins shifted away from the taglight and into control. He asked where Reed was coming from, where he was headed, why he was out so late, whether he had been drinking, whether there was anything illegal in the car. The questions didn't match the reason for the stop, and they weren't about writing a citation for an equipment issue. They were about testing the driver. Reed answered the basic questions that actually mattered for the traffic stop and kept the rest limited. He didn't refuse to speak altogether. He didn't challenge the deputy. He kept it polite and short, the way a careful adult does when they don't want their own words turned into inconsistencies. Harkins tried a different angle. He pushed for consent to search. He did it the way officers often do, with soft language that pretends consent is a routine formality. Reed refused, calmly, clearly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult the deputy. He didn't make a speech about rights. That was the moment the deputy took it personally. Harkins didn't accept the answer and move on. He asked again, then again, reworded. He treated the refusal like a problem that needed to be corrected, not a legal decision a driver is allowed to make. Reed didn't change his tone. He stayed cooperative about what the stop actually was. He stayed calm about what he didn't have to do. Harkins's demeanor tightened. His voice got sharper. His body language shifted closer and more rigid. He started framing Reed's calm refusal as if it were disrespect, even though Reed wasn't being disrespectful. Then Reed asked a question that forces an officer to either stay lawful or admit he's drifting. Reed politely asked whether he was being detained for anything beyond the taglight issue. That question didn't come with attitude. It came with clarity. It was the kind of question that makes a stop either end or escalate, depending on the officer's temperament. Harkins escalated. He didn't give a clean answer that matched the facts. He started acting like the question itself was a provocation. He began treating Reed as difficult, because Reed was not submitting to an unnecessary search. And then Harkins called for backup. Over the radio, he described Reed in a way that didn't match what was happening. He used the kind of vague language that's meant to justify escalation later. Difficult, suspicious, not cooperating, concerned for safety. It was narrative building. He was setting the table so the next officers arriving would step into his version of events. Here's what Harkins didn't seem to understand in that moment. Dispatch audio locks you into a timeline. If you say a driver is suspicious at minute 3, but the video shows you had no specific reason at minute 3, that mismatch becomes a problem. If you claim escalating concern, but the driver's behavior stays calm and consistent, that becomes a bigger problem. Backup arrived and parked behind Reed. Now there were more lights, more uniforms, more pressure. Reed still stayed composed. He kept his hands visible. He answered what was relevant. He did not consent to a search. Harkins continued stretching the stop. He kept talking around the original reason. He kept trying to manufacture justification. Only after Harkins had already moved the stop into a power struggle did Reed state who he was. Reed explained that he was a federal judge and that he was off duty. He didn't say it like a threat. He didn't demand favors. He said it because the stop had stopped being normal, and he needed the deputy to understand he wasn't dealing with someone who would be intimidated into giving up rights, just to make the moment end. Harkins either didn't believe him or decided it didn't matter. His actions showed he was committed to winning the stop. He continued as if the identity was irrelevant. He kept the pressure on. He focused on dominance, not resolution. And this is where the foundation for everything that happened later got poured. Because Harkins wasn't just making choices on the roadside. He was creating a story he planned to put in writing, a report that would reframe calm behavior as suspicious, a report that would label normal questions as resistance, a report that would turn a lawful refusal to consent into a safety concern. Backup arrived behind Harkins a few minutes after the radio call. 2 cruisers on the shoulder for a tag light. Harkins had already told dispatch the driver was difficult and suspicious. So when the second unit showed up, Harkins acted like he needed to justify why he escalated. He walked back to the driver's window and pushed again for consent to search the car. He didn't keep it as a single request. He asked, got a refusal, then asked again in a different way, trying to make refusal sound unreasonable. Reed refused each time. He stayed polite. He stayed calm. He didn't argue. He didn't insult anyone. He simply didn't consent. Harkins treated that refusal like a challenge. His tone got sharper. He started describing Reed's behavior as a problem, even though Reed was still cooperating with the traffic stop itself. Then Harkins ordered Reed to step out of the vehicle. Reed complied. He moved slowly and kept his hands visible. He didn't make sudden reaches. He followed instructions. He stood where Harkins directed him. Harkins kept questioning him about things that had nothing to do with the tag light, where he'd been, where he was going, why he was out late. He repeated the same anything illegal in the car line in different forms. It was clear he was trying to find a reason to keep the stop going or pressure Reed into consent. Reed answered what was necessary and kept the rest short. He asked again whether he was being detained for anything beyond the equipment issue. Harkins didn't give a clear answer tied to a specific crime. He responded with more control language and continued acting like Reed's question itself was suspicious. At this point, Reed stated that he was an off-duty federal judge. He didn't say it like a threat. He didn't demand special treatment. He said it after Harkins had already stretched the stop, as a direct explanation for why Reed was staying careful and asking clear legal questions. Harkins didn't change course. He either didn't believe Reed or decided it didn't matter. He kept the stop on the same track. He continued treating Reed as suspicious based on refusal to consent and normal behavior. Harkins went back to his cruiser and wrote the citation. He took longer than the violation required, and he did not end the stop quickly once he had the documents and the reason for the stop established. He came back, issued the citation, and ended the stop like it was finished and under control. After Reed left, Harkins wrote his report to justify the escalation. He used exaggerated wording to make the extension of the stop sound reasonable. He described normal movements as suspicious. He described Reed's calm questions as resistance. He treated Reed's lawful refusal to consent as a safety concern. He wrote it in a way that made it sound like the situation had been risky from the start, not something he escalated after Reed wouldn't give consent. Reed didn't make a scene that night. He didn't go public. He documented the timeline while it was fresh and began requesting the official records tied to the stop: Bodycam, dashcam, dispatch audio, and the computer-aided dispatch timestamps. Reed requested the records the way a lawyer would, not the way an angry driver would. He didn't ask for favors. He asked for the complete file tied to the stop: Bodycam from Harkins, dashcam from the cruiser, dispatch audio, computer-aided dispatch logs that show when units were assigned, when backup was requested, and when the stop cleared. Those timestamps matter because they don't care about anyone's feelings. The first review didn't happen because Reed went public. It happened because once you request records the right way, the department has to treat it like an official matter. Someone has to pull the footage. Someone has to log it. Someone has to watch it. And the problem showed up fast. Harkins's report described a driver who was difficult and suspicious early in the stop. The video showed a driver who handed over documents, stayed calm, and didn't raise his voice. Harkins's report described escalating concern. The audio showed Harkins escalating after he heard a polite refusal to consent. The timing was worse. The computer-aided dispatch and dashcam time markers showed how long Harkins stayed on that roadside before he even started writing the citation. The report made it sound like suspicion developed naturally and quickly. The logs showed long stretches where Harkins was doing nothing that advanced a taglight citation. He was talking, pressing, repeating questions, waiting, holding time. That matters because the legal limit is simple. A traffic stop can't be prolonged for unrelated investigation without a real reason, not a vibe, not he didn't want to consent, not he asked if he was being detained. The timeline showed the stop got longer because Harkins wanted more than a taglight citation. Dispatch audio created another issue. On the radio, Harkins framed Reed as difficult and suspicious before any concrete event happened that would justify that label. When backup arrived, the scene didn't match what Harkins had sold. No yelling, no threats, no refusal to provide documents, no aggressive movements, just a calm driver standing where he was told. Now, Harkins's report wasn't just off in tone. It was inconsistent with multiple sources that all lined up with each other. Then the review moved from, did this stop get messy, to, did the deputy write something that isn't true? Because the report language wasn't small exaggerations. It was the type of wording departments rely on to justify escalation. Furtive movements, evasive answers, non-compliant behavior, officer safety concerns. Those phrases are supposed to match observable facts. The footage didn't support them. Reed's suspicious movements were slow reaches for documents and normal posture shifts. His evasive answers were short, polite answers to questions that weren't required. His resistance was a lawful refusal to consent and a calm question about detention status. And the judge part, that created a separate track. Once Reed's identity was confirmed through official channels, the department couldn't treat it like a random complaint. Not because he was important, because he was credible, he was careful, and he was clearly documenting. That forces seriousness. So the supervisor had to decide, treat this like a normal stop review or dig deeper and risk finding a bigger problem. Internal affairs got involved. They compared the report to the footage line by line. They pulled the dispatch log. They looked at when Harkins called for backup and what he said. They looked at whether any actual reason existed to extend the stop beyond writing the citation. And that's when Harkins' story started collapsing in a way that's hard to fix, because you can't argue with time. Harkins tried the usual defense when confronted with this kind of review. He leaned on training and experience. He leaned on "I felt unsafe." He leaned on totality of circumstances. Those phrases work when there's at least something on video to point to. Here, there wasn't. Now, the department had an officer whose written narrative didn't match the recordings. That's not just a bad stop. That's credibility damage. And once credibility becomes the issue, it spreads beyond one incident. Because supervisors start asking an uncomfortable question. If he wrote the stop up this way, how many other stops did he write up the same way? Internal Affairs didn't treat this like a weird stop with a fancy driver. They treated it like a credibility problem. Because once an officer's report doesn't match the video, the department has two options: ignore it and pray it never blows up in court, or dig in and see how deep it goes. They dug. First, they pulled Harkins' history, prior complaints, stops that ran long, situations where drivers said he kept pushing for searches and then wrote them up like they were the issue. Then they opened his old reports, and that's where the pattern started looking obvious. Same wording kept showing up across different stops. It didn't look like fresh observations. It looked like a reusable story template that made every stop sound risky, even when nothing actually happened. IA picked several past incidents where footage still existed and compared it to the narratives. They didn't need 50 examples. A few were enough. The video showed regular drivers doing regular things, asking what they were being stopped for, moving slowly to hand over documents, saying no to a search. The reports described those same moments like the drivers were escalating and the deputy was forced to respond. That's the point where a department stops debating, did he handle it well? And starts asking, can we trust this guy in court? Because court is where this becomes expensive. If a defense attorney can show a jury that an officer inflates facts in reports, every case that officer touches becomes a problem. Prosecutors stop wanting them as witnesses. Judges start questioning their testimony. Cases get challenged. Some get dropped. The county gets nervous. Harkins tried to explain the read stop the way officers usually do when video doesn't help them. He leaned on instincts and officer safety. He argued that the refusal and the questions made him unsure about what he was dealing with. He insisted he did what he was trained to do. But none of that fixed the timeline. The log showed he extended the stop before any real suspicion existed. The radio call happened right after Reed refused consent and asked if he was being detained beyond the traffic issue. The footage didn't show the difficult driver dispatch was warned about. It showed a calm adult holding steady while Harkins kept trying to escalate. The department couldn't frame it as a misunderstanding anymore. Not with the recordings, not with the repeated report language, not with other complaints suddenly making sense in hindsight. So the discipline moved fast once it hit the honesty issue. Harkins was terminated for policy violations, tied to prolonging stops and for writing a narrative that wasn't supported by the evidence. And because truthfulness is the foundation of being an officer witness, it didn't stop at getting fired. The decertification process started too, which meant he wasn't just losing this job. He was losing the easy path to another badge. This is the part people miss. He didn't go down because Reed was a judge. He went down because Reed handled it like a judge. No public scene. No roadside threats. No social media campaign. Reed preserved the facts, pulled the records, and forced the department to look at the stop the way a courtroom would look at it. And that dragged the deputy's whole pattern into the light. After that, the fallout spread beyond one person. Supervisors had to explain why earlier complaints didn't lead to tighter oversight. Training got updated around stop duration and consent search pressure. Internal review protocols changed, so template suspicion language started triggering extra scrutiny. The county also had to brace for defense motions in cases where Harkins had been a key witness, because now his credibility was officially damaged. Reed didn't take a victory lap. He got what he wanted, the record, to be honest, and the system to stop pretending this was acceptable. So here's the question for you. If you were in that car, would you have tried to argue your way out on the shoulder, or would you have done what Reed did? Stay calm, document everything, and let the footage bury the lies. Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more stories where accountability comes from facts, policy, and recordings, not shouting, make sure you subscribe.
Move back. Let me see your ID.
Officer, what's wrong?
I gave you an order. Do what I said.
I'll comply with the lawful detention. What crime are you investigating?
You're being non-compliant right now.
Lawful instructions require lawful grounds.
Have something illegal here?
This patrol officer thought he was just teaching a lesson to a suspicious driver. He ignored federal credentials, refused to verify them, and kept escalating a routine stop into a hostile detention. Then the officer's whole posture changed, because the first set of federal SUVs started turning onto the frontage road, and the radio traffic stopped sounding local. He was about to learn he had just handcuffed an undercover DEA agent. Real quick, where are you watching from? What country or what state? Drop it in the comments. And if you like stories where arrogance meets cameras, paperwork, and real accountability, hit like and subscribe. Now back to what happened. By the time anyone driving past could tell something was wrong, the stop had already turned into a control scene. The officer, Cameron Voss, had the driver out of the car and positioned where Voss wanted him. Voss stood close, kept his voice hard, and kept giving rapid instructions designed to keep the driver reacting instead of thinking. The driver, Devin Cole, didn't match the picture Voss was trying to paint. Cole stayed composed. His hands stayed visible. His movements stayed slow. He didn't argue in circles. He repeated one request and one request only. Verify his federal credentials through the proper channel and stop treating the stop like an interrogation. Voss didn't take the easy exit. He treated the credentials like a prop. He dismissed the ID as something anyone could buy. He ignored the fact that there was a standard way to confirm federal status, and he ignored it on purpose. You could see it in the way he kept the situation moving forward instead of pausing to check. He wasn't trying to confirm the truth. He was trying to force a confession to something he hadn't proven. Cole had been working undercover for the DEA as part of a federal task force. That meant his car wasn't a marked unit. His clothes weren't tactical. His day didn't look like law enforcement to strangers. That's the whole point of undercover work. It's also why verification exists, because local traffic enforcement will occasionally bump into federal work, and the system is supposed to prevent exactly this kind of collision. Voss treated that reality like it was a challenge to his authority. The stop started in the most predictable way possible. Commercial strip, warehouses and gas stations, early evening with steady traffic. So there were plenty of witnesses, even if nobody intended to be one. Voss claimed a minor reason to pull Cole over, the kind of vague justification that shows up in thousands of body cams. Slight lane drift, equipment issue, vehicle matches a general description. Nothing that should have turned into cuffs. Cole pulled over cleanly and immediately. No delay, no sudden moves. When Voss walked up, he didn't approach like a neutral professional assessing risk. He approached like someone who had already decided the driver was a problem. Cole did what trained agents do during unexpected contact. He stayed calm and controlled the tempo. He didn't rummage around. He didn't escalate with attitude. He gave standard identification. Then he provided federal credentials in a way that kept everyone safe and kept the interaction clear. That should have triggered a simple sequence. Voss should have stepped back, called it in, asked dispatch to verify, and if he didn't know the right method, he should have called a supervisor It would have taken minutes. Voss did the opposite. He started stacking commands. He pushed Cole out of the vehicle and started asking questions that weren't traffic-related. He tried to get Cole talking about where he was going, who he was meeting, why he was in that area, and what he had in the car. He kept circling back to the same suspicion, even though he hadn't developed probable cause for anything beyond the stop. Cole didn't get pulled into it. He stayed focused on verification and boundaries. He kept insisting Voss either confirm the credentials properly or call a supervisor who would. That refusal to play along annoyed Voss. You could hear it in his tone and see it in his posture. The questions became sharper. The space between them tightened. The officer's safety language started showing up, not as a real response to a threat, but as a justification for control. Then Voss made the decision that turned a bad stop into a major problem. He handcuffed Cole. He didn't do it because Cole attacked him. He didn't do it because Cole tried to run. He did it because Cole wouldn't submit to an improvised interrogation, and Voss didn't like being told, verify it. The cuffs changed everything. It created a detention that had to be justified later, and it created a paper trail that would include bodycam footage, dispatch logs, and supervisor involvement. Cole stayed controlled even then, because he had two problems at the same time. He had to keep himself safe and protect his identity, but he also had to avoid blowing an active operation. Undercover work has real timing. It has real people in motion. When you miss a check-in window, it doesn't stay private for long. That's what Voss didn't understand. He thought he was dealing with a driver who would eventually fold. Cole's task force had a schedule. Cole missed it. Someone noticed. While Voss kept pressing and refusing to verify, the other side of the system started waking up. People called, people checked. People asked where Cole was and why he wasn't answering. The longer Voss dragged it out, the more attention the stop attracted from people with authority he couldn't wave off. The moment the shift began, it didn't start with sirens. It started with Voss's radio. The radio traffic changed tone because a supervisor got involved. Not the casual kind of, what's going on over there, but the clipped, urgent kind, where someone has already heard enough to be concerned. The supervisor told Voss to stop escalating, hold position, and wait for verification. Voss didn't comply the way he should have. He pushed back on the radio, still acting like he had the bigger picture, still acting like the credentials were a lie, still acting like the detention was his call alone. And right after that, headlights swept across the scene from the side road, followed by the unmistakable shape of federal SUVs pulling in with purpose. Federal vehicles started arriving within minutes of the supervisor radio traffic, and the difference was obvious even to people who didn't know law enforcement. These weren't random patrol units responding to a suspicious person call. They were coordinated task force vehicles, and the people getting out of them moved with purpose and clear roles. Officer Derek Halverson saw the first one pull in behind his cruiser and tightened up. He kept Jamal Mercer in handcuffs near the shoulder, angled away from the car, the way officers do when they want full control of someone's movement and sightline. Halverson kept talking as if the scene was still his, as if the arrival of new units didn't change the rules. Mercer didn't react. He didn't try to talk over anyone. He stayed still, kept his breathing controlled, and kept his hands where they were supposed to be. He'd already done the key thing. He'd identified himself as federal and asked Halverson to verify it the correct way. The fact that this had gone on long enough for backup to arrive told Mercer exactly what kind of officer he was dealing with. Two people stepped out of the first federal SUV. They weren't dressed like patrol. They weren't aggressive. They were plainclothes with clear identifiers, and they immediately started doing what Halverson should have done from the start: establish facts, establish verification, and control the risk without turning it into a personal dominance contest. One of them approached Halverson and asked for the detention bases and what verification steps had been taken. Not a debate, basic accountability questions. Halverson answered with the usual shield language. He described Mercer as suspicious, said Mercer was evasive, and implied the credentials were questionable. He leaned on officer safety while avoiding the one point that mattered. He still hadn't verified the credentials through dispatch, a supervisor, or any recognized federal contact channel. The federal agent pressed him on specifics. What information did Halverson call in? Did dispatch confirm anything? Did he request a supervisor before using cuffs? Did he document any articulable threat that justified a custodial detention during a traffic stop? Halverson didn't have clean answers. He tried to redirect the conversation towards feelings and assumptions. He kept describing what he believed Mercer might be. That's where officers get themselves in trouble, because feelings don't hold up against recordings. At the same time, the people arriving didn't swarm Halverson or treat him like an enemy. They treated him like a local officer who had created a preventable problem and needed to be managed before he made it worse. More federal vehicles arrived. A couple unmarked SUVs. A marked unit tied to the task force. The perimeter tightened, not in a theatrical way, but in a practical way. Traffic control, witness management, safety spacing, and a clear line of authority forming around the situation. Halverson started realizing his story wasn't landing the way it usually did. With regular callers and regular stops, he could talk fast, sound confident, and rely on the assumption that the detained person must have done something. Here, the arriving agents weren't buying tone. They wanted process and proof. Halverson tried to regain control by increasing pressure on Mercer. He repeated commands toward him, warned him about making it worse, and acted like Mercer's calm was a problem. Mercer didn't give him the reaction he wanted. Mercer stayed steady and kept repeating the same boundary. Federal agent, credentials presented, verify through proper channels. Then Halverson's own department radio traffic started cutting through again, louder and more direct. His supervisor's voice wasn't casual anymore. The supervisor told Halverson to stop escalating, maintain distance, and wait for verification. The supervisor also asked a direct question about whether Halverson had placed Mercer in cuffs and why. Halverson answered on the radio in a way that sounded defensive, and that's important because radio logs become evidence too. If you contradict yourself, you don't only contradict yourself on camera, you contradict yourself in the official record. A federal supervisor arrived next, and the structure of the scene changed immediately. She identified herself clearly, then addressed Halverson like someone who had already reviewed enough information to know this was out of bounds. She asked why a claimed federal agent was handcuffed without verification, and why Halverson had ignored the supervisor instruction to hold and confirm. Halverson tried to justify it again with suspicion language. He said the ID looked wrong. He said Mercer wasn't cooperating the way he wanted. He said Mercer's behavior made him uneasy. The federal supervisor didn't argue, and she asked for the verification attempt. She asked for the dispatch confirmation. She asked for the documented reason a traffic stop turned into a custodial detention. She asked if Halverson searched the vehicle or attempted to. Halverson had almost nothing to produce. The whole situation existed because he chose not to verify early and chose force instead. The federal supervisor then turned to Mercer and asked him basic welfare and integrity questions. Was he okay? Had any property been handled? Had the vehicle been accessed? Had he been forced to reveal anything compromising? Mercer answered in the controlled, limited way an undercover agent has to answer. He confirmed he presented credentials, requested verification, and warned the detention was interfering with active federal work. He did not discuss targets or operation details. At that point, the federal supervisor gave a direct instruction to remove the handcuffs. One of the agents stepped in and removed them carefully. No drama, no speeches, just correction and control returning to the proper place. Mercer rolled his wrists once, not to show off, but because cuffs hurt when they've been on longer than they should have been. Halverson stood there watching it happen, and now you could see the shift in him. He wasn't confident anymore. He wasn't performing anymore. He was calculating. He was trying to figure out how to explain a decision that was recorded from multiple angles, contradicted by his own radio traffic, and now confirmed as wrong by people who had the authority to say it on the spot. He tried to backpedal. He claimed he didn't know. He claimed he couldn't verify. He claimed he had to act fast. None of that fixed the central issue. He refused the verification pathway when it was offered, then he escalated anyway. As soon as the cuffs came off, the scene stopped being a debate and started being documentation. The federal supervisor didn't waste time arguing with Derek Halverson. She treated him like a risk factor that needed to be contained. She told her people to secure Mercer's vehicle area without touching anything that could compromise the operation. She told another agent to start a timeline while everything was still fresh. That included the stop time, the moment credentials were presented, the moment Halverson refused verification, the moment he escalated to cuffs, and the moment his own supervisor ordered him to pause. Halverson tried to keep talking. He kept trying to shape the narrative in real time. He kept repeating the same justifications in different words, hoping one version would stick. It wasn't working. His own supervisor arrived from the local side, and the supervisor didn't come in to back him automatically. The supervisor came in to manage damage. That's what a smart supervisor does when they hear a stop has turned into a potential civil rights issue with federal involvement. The supervisor asked Halverson for his Bodycam status first, not his opinion. Status. Was it recording the entire time? Was it activated before contact? Did he pause it? Did he move it? Simple questions that tell you whether someone knew they were wrong. Halverson answered, and the supervisor immediately told dispatch to preserve the audio and logs. That meant the initial call reason, the unit arrival times, Halverson's radio responses, and the moment he was told to stand down. Those recordings don't care about anyone's pride. They're just there, and they don't forget. Mercer stayed close to the federal group, but kept his focus on the operation problem, not the ego problem. A detention like this can blow an undercover timeline in seconds. If he missed a meet or a surveillance handoff, targets could move. If local units started running his name through systems or broadcasting his status incorrectly, it could leak into channels that were never supposed to have it. The federal supervisor handled that part cleanly. She asked for only the information needed to keep Mercer safe and keep the case intact. She didn't ask him to explain the whole investigation on the roadside. She didn't pressure him to say anything that would end up on local body cam footage. That contrast mattered. Halverson had tried to force Mercer into talking. The DEA team moved like they understood rules, risk, and containment. Halverson kept hovering near the conversation like he deserved a seat at the table. He didn't. He had already shown he couldn't be trusted with sensitive information. Now the accountability part started showing itself in small, concrete actions. The supervisor told Halverson to step back and wait by his cruiser. That instruction wasn't punishment. It was control. It also created a clean separation on camera. Federal personnel handling their agent, local leadership handling their officer. Halverson didn't like it. He tried to argue the instruction. He tried to suggest the federal people were overreacting. That was another mistake. Every extra word gave the recordings more material. Then came the moment where the bias stopped being implied and started being obvious, even without slurs. Halverson tried to justify the stop by describing Mercer in terms that didn't match the objective facts. He leaned into stereotypes about criminal behavior, kept talking about the kind of person he thought he had, and framed Mercer's calm, credentialed response as manipulative. It was the kind of reasoning you hear when an officer isn't reacting to behavior, but to an assumption about who the person is. The federal supervisor didn't let that pass. She didn't need to quote policy like a robot. She cut to the core. Halverson had been offered a verification pathway early, and he refused it. He escalated anyway. He kept escalating after his own supervisor told him to stop. That isn't policing. That's ego overriding procedure. Mercer's team started collecting identifiers quietly. Badge number, unit assignment, names of responding officers, witness locations, body cam confirmation for everyone on scene. That's how these incidents become cases, not by yelling, by preserving evidence and narrowing facts until excuses have nowhere to hide. Halverson's supervisor called for another unit to take over Halverson's patrol responsibilities for the rest of the shift. That's an immediate signal. It means leadership already expects this to go beyond a simple coaching conversation. It also means they want Halverson off the street before he makes a second bad decision. Halverson tried to negotiate his way out of that too. He suggested it was unnecessary. He acted like he was being treated unfairly, and nobody cared. Not anymore. The federal supervisor told Halverson's supervisor that this wasn't staying local. She made it clear the detention interfered with a DOJ-linked operation and involved a credentialed federal agent being restrained without verification. That's the kind of fact pattern that triggers federal interest fast, especially when there's body cam. Mercer didn't celebrate. He didn't taunt. He didn't need to. His win wasn't emotional, it was structural. The truth was recorded and the right people were now in the loop. Before Mercer left the scene, the federal supervisor did one more thing that mattered. She ensured Mercer's vehicle wasn't searched by local officers. If Halverson had touched anything, it would become a chain of custody issue. It would create exposure risk for the case. It would also create another legal problem for the department. Halverson's supervisor asked Halverson a direct question about whether he attempted a search or opened any doors. Halverson gave an answer that didn't sound confident, and that hesitation landed badly. When someone is sure they followed policy, they don't hesitate on basic facts. Mercer was moved away from the shoulder and into the federal vehicle area briefly so his team could do a quick welfare check and get him back on track. His phone and communication plan got adjusted. His task force would reroute the operation if needed. They weren't going to gamble the case because one patrol officer wanted to feel powerful during a traffic stop. Halverson watched Mercer leave the immediate detention space and realized the scene had ended without him being the hero of his own story. He wasn't the authority figure anymore. He was the problem that had to be managed. And right there, still on the roadside, the supervisor told Halverson he was being pulled from duty pending review. Not a future promise, a now action. He was instructed to keep his body cam on, remain available, and prepare a written statement. That's the beginning of consequences. The local department opened a formal internal affairs case and immediately locked down evidence. They pulled the primary officer's body cam, any secondary officer cams, dash video if it existed, dispatch audio, and supervisor radio traffic. They also pulled the officer's stop history for patterns, how often his routine stops turned into detentions, how often he used cuffs without an arrest, how often supervisors had to correct him. The officer got taken off the street while the review ran. Administrative leave is standard because it prevents a second incident and it keeps the investigation clean. Then they ordered a written statement, not a casual explanation, a documented account that gets compared to video, second by second. Internal affairs focused on a short list of questions. Did the driver present federal credentials? Did the officer take any real steps to verify them? Was there an actual safety threat that justified handcuffs? Did the officer follow supervisor direction once told to stop and wait? Did the officer try to search the vehicle or pressure for information outside the scope of a traffic stop? If the answers don't line up with the footage, the case becomes simple. The officer's intent stops mattering. His actions become the issue. On the federal side, the response stayed blunt and procedural. They treated it as interference risk. They requested the same evidence package, documented the operational disruption in general terms, and elevated it through the proper channels. When a local officer refuses to verify and escalates anyway, it's not just bad judgment. It's a trust failure between agencies, and federal leadership takes that personally because it puts people and cases at risk. Then the fallout split into 3 lanes. Lane 1, discipline. The department moved towards suspension or termination based on policy violations that are easy to prove on recordings. Failure to verify, improper escalation, and ignoring supervision. Union process can slow it down, but it can't rewrite video. Lane 2, civil rights exposure. The agent's side pursued accountability through legal channels. The core argument wasn't complicated. Credentials were presented, verification was available, and the officer escalated anyway. If bias indicators show up in tone, assumptions, or inconsistent justification, it strengthens the case that this wasn't a neutral mistake. Lane 3, command level changes. The department had to show it learned something, because this kind of incident makes everyone look incompetent. So they tightened procedures, where ego usually hides. Mandatory credential verification steps before escalation required supervisor involvement. When a stop extends past a set time or turns into cuffs. Automatic review when cuffs are used without an arrest. Clear discipline triggers for refusing verification and for defying supervisor orders. Clearer interagency contact pathways so local supervisors can confirm federal status quickly. Federal task forces also adjusted their side. Better check-in rules, faster missing contact triggers, and clearer emergency verification, so a single patrol officer can't trap an undercover agent in a roadside mess again. In the end, the officer didn't get to frame it as a misunderstanding. He created a record. Cameras, radio logs, and supervisor instructions pinned it down. That record followed him into internal affairs, into legal review, and into whatever discipline came next. And the agent didn't win by outshouting anyone. He won because he stayed controlled, stuck to verification, and let the system document the failure. That's the whole point of accountability stories like this. Power works until there's proof. Proof